presentation was on. So Unit 3, Lecture 1, at the very top. And this is going to be the macrostructure of skeletal muscles. So the big picture, just like we did the macrostructure and microstructure of bones, we're going to look at the macrostructure of skeletal muscle. You guys are like oddly quiet. Is it your new seats maybe? Oh, maybe it's the new seats. Yeah, everyone's okay though? There's nothing like, okay, all right. All right, so we're going to start off by writing this is skeletal muscle. So that's what this entire picture is of, skeletal muscle. Except for this part right here. What's this part right here that skeletal muscle is connected to? Bones. We can just label that bone for now so we don't get confused, but that's going to be the bone. And so in our definition of skeletal muscle right here, we can just write that skeletal muscle is attached to bone. What else do we know about skeletal muscle? How many nuclei does it have? One or many? Many, yeah. So it's multinucleated. What else does it have that gives us a hint that it would be skeletal muscle tissue? It's long, yeah, good. So they're long and thread-like cells. What else are we going to see in these cells? Striations, good. They have striations, and one last time, do they move voluntarily or involuntarily? Voluntarily. So I'll read that one more time. They're attached to bone, they're multinucleated, they're long and thread-like, they have striations, and they move voluntarily. All right, so now we're going to go in and look. We're going to start with number 1, which is right here. So this little tiny projection, it doesn't usually stick out like this, but it's kind of showing you the different layers, so it has it sticking out. And this is number 1. And what this is in our skeletal muscle tissue, this is an individual skeletal muscle cell. We call individual muscle cells muscle fibers. So a muscle fiber is another name for a muscle cell. So number 1, muscle fiber. A muscle fiber is just a fancy word for a muscle what? Cell, muscle cell. So I want you to look at this picture here because like I said, there's so many circles. So we're going to write the number of each thing so we can kind of, if we're looking back later, identify what we're looking at. So if this is one muscle cell or one muscle fiber in this entire skeletal muscle, I want you to count how many muscle fibers we have, or estimate how many we have. Anyone have a number? Yeah, Maria? 6. So where did you count in here? So that's in this part. We want the entire skeletal muscle. There's more than 6. Yeah, like 90. Is that what you said? Yeah, like 90. So here's what you do. You count. This one is 1. In this little package right here, we have about, 10 to 12 of these. And so if we count, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, about 8 bundles. And so 10 times 8, 8 times 12 is about 90. So you're looking for these little individual dots all throughout, and we have about 90 if you approximate it. So that will just help us remember what we're looking at. So there is about 90-ish in this picture. And what they're made up of is they're made up of proteins. They have nuclei in them. And they're just a cell. So they have what all cells have. They have nuclei. They have all the cell organelles like ribosomes and endoplasmic reticulum and Golgi apparatus, everything you learned about in bio or 8th grade. But the one organelle we're going to write down because it's really important to muscles is the one that provides energy, or it's known as the powerhouse of the cell. What organelle is that? Yeah, mitochondria. So that's what we're going to write down. Again, it has all of the cell organelles, but we're going to work with the mitochondria or list the mitochondria because it's most important to muscle cells. Why do muscle cells need a lot of energy? Yeah, they're the effort in our levers, right? They're always moving. They always need some energy to move. So mitochondria are like, there's a lot of them in our muscle fibers or our muscle cells. So that's our starting point. I'm going to underline... No, we'll leave it at that. Okay, so number 2, we're going to kind of move our way outwards. So around a muscle fiber, we have tissue surrounding it. So every layer of muscle is going to have a layer of connective tissue kind of protecting it, encasing it. And it's a little bit hard to see, but these dark circles are our muscle fibers. Around them, you have this light gray material. That light gray material is number 2. Okay, so again, these dark circles are our muscle fibers. All that light gray around them is our number 2, which is called the endomysium. endomysium. So if you can say that after me, endomysium. Endomysium. So this is a layer of connective tissue. And what is it surrounding? Yeah, and it surrounds a muscle fiber. So it's a layer of connective tissue that surrounds and separates muscle fibers. Okay. I'm going to underline connective tissue or connective because as we saw in the slides, we should be seeing in these skeletal muscle tissues, we should see muscle tissue, we should see connective tissue, we should see nervous tissue. So here's our first example of some connective tissue making up our skeletal muscle. Number 3 is going to be right here where these 2 lines branch. So this entire structure that we're currently been looking inside of, this is called a fascicle. So number 3 is called a fascicle. Can you say fascicle? Fascicle. F-A-S-C-I-C-L-E. A fascicle is just a bundle of what? A bundle of muscle fibers. Yeah. So a fascicle is a bundle of muscle fibers. Bless you. How many fascicles do we have in our image? Yeah, good. So Ileana said about 8, right? So if we look, we have about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and probably 1 back there, 8. So next to that, I'm also going to write there are about 8 in this picture. Just so, again, if you're looking back, you're like, which of the circles is this? You can count and figure out those are the fascicles. Okay, and so I'm going to underline the word muscle because this is contributing to the muscle tissue. So we see connective tissue, then we're going to see a layer of muscle tissue. And since we have a layer of muscle tissue, we are always going to have connective tissue surrounding it. So our next layer of connective tissue is called the paramecium. Where we're going to label that is right here, number 4. So if you look at all these fascicles, they have this one kind of band of white around each of them, and that's the paramecium. It encases the fascicle. So it's like the casing around it, okay? So number 3 is pointing to the whole fascicle, and then number 4 is this outer layer of the fascicle. It kind of encases it. So again, it's like a shell. So number 4 is called the paramecium. Say paramecium. Paramecium, and that one is, again, connective tissue. Oops, connective tissue. And this connective tissue, so connective tissue that surrounds what? Yeah, so connective tissue that surrounds fascicles. Surrounds and separates. It separates them from each other. So every bundle of called a fascicle, has paramecium like a shell, a layer surrounding it, encasing it, holds the muscle together, kind of protects it, and is there as just a structural layer. All right, so then we go out to this last outer ring here. So if you look, we have our fascicle. We have our what surrounding the fascicle again? Paramecium. And then we have this white layer right here that surrounds all of the fascicles and all of their parameciums. So we're going to label that up here as number 5. And it's kind of faded there, but I'm just going to draw a line there and there. So you can see it right here. You can see it on the top. It's the red look to our muscle right there. And number 5 is called the epimecium. Where have we heard the word epi before? Epi what? Oh, epiphyseal. Yeah, epidermis, right? So epidermis was what layer of the skin? The top, the middle, or the bottom? Top. So same thing. Epidermis, epimecium is going to be right here at the top or the upper layer, outer layer of the muscle. So epi means on top of all the others. So epimecium. And this one is what kind of tissue do you think? Connective. Yeah, this is again connective tissue. So all these eciems, endomecium, inner, I think endo, what do I think? Indo? I don't know. I think that's what I think. Indo. That's the inner layer. And then the paramecium's in the middle. I don't really have a trick to remember that if anyone thinks of something. And then epimecium's on the top. So those are all of our connective tissue layers. And each one surrounds a different part of the muscle. So connective tissue, and again I'm going to underline connective, that surrounds and supports the entire muscle. Now the epimecium, if you look, it continues all the way, it continues all the way back to the bone, but right here it changes color. Why? What does the epimecium turn into right here? What connects bone to muscle? A tendon, yeah. So right here is a tendon. So we're going to label that number 6, this white part. It's just an extension of the epimecium that connects the muscle to the bone. So that's going to be number 6. I'm going to put that down here. Tendon. So it's epimecium continuing from the muscle to form a connection with bone. Okay. And then we have 2 more in this image. So the next thing I want us to look at is these dark tubes here. Any guesses as to what these dark tubes would be? It's kind of like in those Haversian systems in our bone. They needed nutrients, they needed oxygen. Where do we get all that from to keep our cells alive? What was that? Yeah, blood. So these are blood vessels. If you see these dark tubes all throughout. And so I'll label that right over here, number 7. But again, every living cell in our body needs oxygen, needs nutrients to stay alive. And then it's also going to need to get rid of waste. And so these blood vessels help with that. So those are our blood vessels peeking through. And I'll label that number 7, blood vessels. And maybe we'll just write supplies or supply muscles with oxygen and nutrients. And remove waste. If you already know that about blood vessels, you don't have to write it down, but if that's something you think you might forget, always good to write. Now the last piece, this is sometimes a little bit confusing because it's a clear piece, and so it's going to be encasing the entire skeletal muscle. It's kind of like if you get like a mint when you leave a restaurant and it has like that clear plastic casing. You see the mint, but there is a plastic casing around it. Or if you get like one of those giant lollipops that have the plastic around it, you can see the lollipop, but there's a plastic invisible casing around it. So that's what's going on up here. Think of this whole skeletal muscle like in a clear wrapper. And so it's going to be labeled at the same place as number 5 is. But we're going to label it number 8. And that's called the fascia. So right around, what you see here is red. That's because that's the, what mesium? Epimysium. But surrounding the epimysium is a clear layer that just kind of encases the whole thing. It even encases our tendon right here, and that's called the fascia. So you should have seen all these words as you were taking notes last night. Now this is, again, a layer of connective tissue. I'm going to underline the word connective, that separates neighboring skeletal muscles. Bless you. Yeah. And I'm just going to write it covers the epimysium and tendon. So if you look back and you've been underlining all these words, connective tissue, again, a pattern you see is it ends in ecium, except for fascia. So we see lots of connective tissue in here, and then we see lots of muscle pieces. So if we go from smallest to largest, we have a muscle fiber. That's the smallest individual muscle cell. Actually, I'll wait for you guys to finish writing this first. This one's a fascia, a layer of connective tissue that separates neighboring skeletal muscles. It covers the epimysium and the tendon. If it helps you to write something like candy wrapper, I don't know, maybe that will help you remember. It's just this like clear encasing. Okay, so we'll go back up. Does anyone need this part right here anymore? Yeah.